The red dust swirled in spiraling torrents across the Martian landscape, coating everything in its path with a fine crimson powder. Marvin Hobbs wiped his grimy window with an equally grimy rag and squinted at the storm's intensity. The winds howled against the reinforced walls of his workshop, a sound he'd grown accustomed to in his 15 years on the Red Planet. "Gonna be another long one," he muttered to himself, turning back to the anti-grav compressor he'd been repairing for the better part of the afternoon. His workshop, Hobbs Interspecies Mechanical Solutions, sat on the outskirts of New Olympus, one of Mars' most prosperous frontier colonies, perched precariously on the edge of Valles Marineris. The location kept his rent manageable and the complaints about his occasional explosive experiments to a minimum. At 38, Marvin's face carried the weathered lines of someone who'd spent too much time squinting at delicate machinery and poor lighting. His hands, calloused and stained with various mechanical fluids that would never fully wash away, moved with practiced precision over the compressor's innards. What his hands lacked in elegance, they made up for in an almost supernatural ability to coax function from the most stubborn of mechanisms. On the workbench beside him sat a dog-eared paper copy of Xenotechnology, Principles and Practices, Volume 3. Marvin collected old books, real books with pages you could turn and bindings that cracked pleasantly when opened. Digital manuals were more efficient, but they couldn't capture the soul of mechanical knowledge the way paper could. The workshop's comm system crackled to life, its ancient speaker adding a layer of static to the already garbled translation coming through. "Hobbs human, external alert, require immediate assistance." The voice modulated between high-pitched squeaks and baritone rumbles, the universal translator struggling with whatever language was being fed into it. Marvin sighed, set down his micro-adjuster, and pressed the response button. "Hobbs here. Who is this? And what kind of assistance are you looking for during a Category 3 dust storm?" "No identity disclosure possible. Emergency landing, ship, not functioning correct." There was a wet, bubbling sound that the translator didn't attempt to convert. "Great. Probably another Rigelian freighter pilot who'd skimped on atmospheric shielding maintenance. Third one this month. Look, I close in 30 minutes, and the colony's safety protocols prohibit." The building shook violently, sending tools clattering to the floor. A sound like thunder mixed with the screech of tearing metal drowned out the comm system. Marvin instinctively dropped to the floor, covering his head as the lights flickered and dust rained from the ceiling. When the rumbling stopped, he cautiously got to his feet and looked out the window. Through the swirling red haze, approximately 50 meters from his workshop, he could make out a dark shape where nothing had been before. Something large had crash-landed. "Well, shit," Marvin muttered, reaching for his emergency kit and the breathing apparatus hanging by the door. So much for closing on time. The moment he stepped outside, the storm hit him with physical force, the fine dust finding its way into every crease and fold of his clothing despite his protective gear. He fought his way forward, shielding his eyes with one arm while the other clutched his toolkit. As he drew closer, the ship emerged from the dust. Like a hallucination taking solid form, Marvin stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't like any vessel he'd ever seen or worked on, and he'd worked on plenty. The hull appeared to be made of some kind of semi-transparent material that pulsed with internal light, shifting between deep purple and electric blue. But what truly seized his attention were the enormous wing-like appendages folded against its sides, structures that looked uncannily like the wings of Earth's mythical dragons, complete with skeletal supports and membranous material stretched between. "Holy," Marvin whispered, the rest of his exclamation lost in the wind. As he approached, a section of the hull rippled and parted, forming an entrance. From within emerged what appeared to be a floating mass of translucent gel, shot through with threads of gold and green. It hovered at approximately human height, though its shape constantly shifted, never quite settling into a definite form. Hobbs, human. The gelatinous entity pulsed as it spoke, the words coming from somewhere within its mass rather than from anything resembling a mouth. "That's me," Marvin confirmed, raising his voice over the storm. "Let's get inside before we both get sandblasted." Inside the ship, the noise of the storm became a distant murmur. The interior was as strange as the exterior, organic-looking corridors with walls that seemed to breathe, illuminated by the same shifting light that pulsed through the hull. The temperature was uncomfortably warm, and the air carried a scent like ozone mixed with something floral. "I am designated Fixer," the gelatinous being burbled, its form contracting and expanding as it led Marvin deeper into the vessel. Ship entity experiencing critical failure in metamorphosis cycle. Metamorphosis? Marvin raised an eyebrow. This ship is alive? Correct. Biomechanical symbiosis. Ship entity grows wings for void-jumping phase. Process incomplete. Dangerous. Marvin had heard rumors of living ships from the outer reaches, but he'd always dismissed them as exaggerations or misunderstandings of advanced technology. Yet here he was, standing inside what appeared to be a genuinely biological spacecraft. Fixer led him to what must have been the ship's equivalent of an engine room, a vast chamber where the walls pulsed more vigorously, and enormous crystalline structures rose from the floor like stalagmites, crackling with energy. 6 expert technicians already attempted repair. Fixer's translation came through with an unmistakable note of anxiety. All declared impossible. 3. Not returning to colony after attempt. That last bit made Marvin pause. Not returning. What happened to them? Fixer's form shuddered in what might have been discomfort. Unknown. Perhaps fear. Perhaps absorbed. Before Marvin could process the implications of that, Fixer continued, "Ship entity must complete wing metamorphosis within 27 rotations, or catastrophic energy release occurs." Catastrophic how? Marvin asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Equivalent to human fusion device. Destroys New Olympus and significant portion of Valles Marineris. Marvin whistled low. "So, no pressure then." He set down his toolkit and began a careful examination of the crystalline structures, keeping a respectful distance. "Mind if I take some readings?" Without waiting for permission, he pulled out his handheld diagnostic scanner and aimed it at the nearest crystal. The device sparked violently and went dead in his hand. "Interesting," he muttered, shaking out his slightly numbed fingers. "Your ship doesn't seem to like my equipment." Ship entity defensive, previous technicians, invasive methods, caused pain. Marvin considered this. "All right, then, let's try something different." He knelt beside his toolkit and pulled out his oldest, simplest tools, manual wrenches, mechanical pressure gauges, and a stethoscope that had belonged to his grandfather. As he approached the nearest crystal with the stethoscope, Fixer emitted a high-pitched whine. "Careful, previous human touched similar place, not seen again." "I'm just going to listen," Marvin reassured the gelatinous captain. "No cutting, no probing, just understanding." He gently placed the stethoscope against the base of the crystal. A deep, rhythmic thrumming vibrated through the instrument, complex and utterly alien, yet somehow carrying the unmistakable cadence of a heartbeat. For the next several hours, Marvin worked cautiously, using only his simplest tools and relying heavily on his senses. Touch, hearing, even smell. The ship seemed to respond differently to each approach, sometimes allowing contact, other times heating up or generating small electrical discharges that sent Marvin scrambling back with singed fingers. "Your ship," he finally said, sitting back on his heels, "doesn't need fixing in the conventional sense. Something's blocking its natural process." Fixer's form contracted to half its previous size, then expanded again, Explain. It's like, Marvin searched for an analogy, like a butterfly struggling to emerge from its cocoon. The wings are formed, but something's preventing them from unfurling properly. Yes, exactly this, Fixer pulsed excitedly, sending droplets of its gelatinous form splattering against the wall, where they were quickly reabsorbed. Can Hobbs' human assist transformation? Marvin ran a hand through his dust-crusted hair. Maybe, but I need to understand more about how this ship works, not just mechanically, but biologically. Do you have any kind of technical manuals, blueprints, growth charts? Fixer's form dimmed slightly. Such information. Sacred, not for non-species. Well, Marvin sighed, we're at an impasse then. I can't fix what I don't understand, and I can't understand without information. He stood and began packing his tools, frustration evident in his movements. As he closed the kit, his gaze fell on the worn manual he'd brought along out of habit, its cover barely visible beneath a layer of red dust. An idea struck him. Fixer, you said other technicians tried to fix your ship. What methods did they use? Scanner devices, cutting tools, one brought large energy probe. Fixer's form shuddered. Pain, ship entity rejected. And what am I doing differently? Fixer pulsed thoughtfully. Hobbs' human listens, uses simple things, respects ship entities' boundaries. Marvin nodded slowly. I think your ship needs trust more than it needs repairs. It's stuck in a vulnerable state of transformation, and it's scared. Ship entities do not experience fear, Fixer objected, but its form rippled in a way that suggested uncertainty. Everything alive experiences fear, Marvin countered gently. He held up his manual. In my culture, we record our knowledge. We share it to help each other understand complex systems. Would your ship feel less threatened if I shared my knowledge first? Fixer hesitated, then drifted closer to the manual. A thin tendril extended from its mass and hovered over the book's cover. Perhaps acceptable exchange. That night, as the dust storm continued to rage outside, Marvin sat cross-legged on the floor of the ship's crystal chamber, reading aloud from his collection of technical manuals by the light of a portable lamp. He'd returned briefly to his workshop to collect his books, along with some food and a change of clothes. The ship seemed to respond to his voice, the pulsing lights synchronizing with his reading rhythm, the crystals humming at different frequencies as he explained various mechanical principles. Fixer hovered nearby, occasionally interrupting with questions or clarifications. As the hours passed, Marvin noticed the gelatinous alien gradually moving closer, its form becoming more stable, less agitated. Your species values this physical knowledge recording, Fixer observed during a pause in the reading. Books? Marvin closed the manual he'd been reading from. Yeah, I suppose we do. Digital information is more efficient, but there's something about physical books that feels more real, more permanent. Understand this feeling. Fixer's translation came through with surprising clarity. My species records through memory crystal growth. Physical, tangible. A tendril gestured toward the crystalline structures. These contain ship entities' growth memories. Marvin's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The crystals aren't engines, they're memory banks. The ship's brain. Simplification, but essentially correct. Growing wings requires pattern memories of previous transformations. Current crystal memory incomplete. It's missing information, Marvin breathed. It can't complete the transformation because it doesn't know how. It's like trying to build something without the full blueprint. Previous genetic memory damaged in void storm, Fixer confirmed. Cannot complete wing pattern without. Marvin leaned back against a warm, pulsating wall, his mind racing. So what we need is to somehow provide the missing pattern information. Not possible. Pattern information specific to species. Marvin wasn't convinced. Maybe, or maybe all growth patterns share certain universal principles: fractal mathematics, structural integrity, energy distribution. He trailed off, already mentally cataloging which of his books might contain relevant information. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp crackling from a panel near what Marvin had come to think of as the ship's central nervous system. A projection appeared in the air, a security feed showing the exterior of the ship. Through the diminishing dust storm, a convoy of vehicles bearing the new Olympus Colonial Enforcement insignia was approaching. "Ah, hell," Marvin muttered. "Looks like someone reported your crash landing." The projection zoomed in on the lead vehicle, revealing a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Commander Diana Powell, head of Colonial Enforcement. Marvin had crossed paths with her before, usually resulting in fines for operating without proper permits or exceeding colony noise ordinances with his more explosive experiments. "Authority human comes." Fixer's form contracted anxiously. "Will impound ship entity. Will dissect for study." "Not if I can help it," Marvin said, getting to his feet. "Wait here." He made his way to the ship's entrance and stepped outside. The storm had weakened to a moderate dust shower, and the morning sun cast an eerie red glow through the haze. The convoy of enforcement vehicles had stopped at a cautious distance, and officers in protective gear were establishing a perimeter. Commander Powell approached, her environmental suit marked with the gold insignia of her rank. She removed her breathing mask as she came within speaking distance, revealing her perpetual expression of disapproval. "Hobbs," she said by way of greeting, "I might have known you'd be mixed up in this. Care to explain why you're trespassing in an unregistered alien vessel during a safety lockdown?" "Good morning to you too, Commander," Marvin replied with forced cheerfulness. "I was called out for emergency repairs, professional courtesy, you understand." Powell's eyes narrowed. "That thing in there isn't registered with Colonial Transportation. It crashed without filing a flight plan, carries no identification markers, and is emitting energy signatures that violate at least 15 safety protocols." She held up a tablet displaying a list of regulatory citations. "Under Colony Charter Section 29.8, I'm impounding this vessel pending full investigation." "Look, Commander," Marvin lowered his voice, "this isn't like impounding some Regellian's hot-rodded shuttle. This ship is different. It's alive, and it's in trouble." "Alive?" Powell's expression shifted from skepticism to alarm. "All the more reason for containment. Biological contaminants, unknown life forms. This is exactly what Section 29.8 was written for." She gestured to her officers. "Secure the perimeter. No one in or out until the containment team arrives from Central." "You don't understand," Marvin insisted, stepping into her path. "This ship is undergoing some kind of metamorphosis. If it doesn't complete the process in the next few days, it could trigger a massive energy release. We're talking colony-wide destruction." Powell stared at him for a long moment. "You expect me to believe that? Run your own scans if you don't believe me, but from a safe distance, this ship doesn't react well to invasive probing." Powell glanced at the ship, then back at Marvin. "You have 24 hours to prove your claim and resolve the situation. After that, the containment team takes over, and you'll be facing charges for obstruction and illegal harboring of unregistered extraterrestrials." She tapped something on her wrist comm. "I'm leaving 2 officers to monitor. They have orders to call me if anything changes." As she turned to leave, she added over her shoulder, "Don't make me regret this, Hobbs." Marvin watched the convoy depart, leaving behind 2 enforcement officers who took up positions at a respectful distance from the ship. He sighed heavily and returned inside. 24 hours, he told Fixer. "That's all the time we have before they try to take over." Fixer's form rippled with what might have been anxiety. Not sufficient time for natural metamorphosis. Then we'll have to find a way to accelerate the process, Marvin said, rubbing his tired eyes. But first, I need coffee. Inside his workshop, Marvin brewed a pot of what passed for coffee on Mars, a synthetic blend that mimicked the real thing just enough to satisfy the caffeine addiction without wasting precious import quotas on actual beans. He filled a thermos, grabbed more reference materials, and headed back to the ship. He found Fixer in the crystal chamber, its gelatinous form partially merged with one of the larger crystals in what appeared to be some kind of information exchange. "I brought refreshments," Marvin announced, holding up the thermos. "Though I'm not sure what you eat, drink, absorb." Fixer detached from the crystal, its form rippling in what Marvin was beginning to recognize as amusement. "Process energy directly, but curious about human sustenance." Marvin poured a cup of the steaming liquid and held it out. Fixer extended a tendril that hovered just above the surface, absorbing the rising steam. "Interesting chemical composition," the alien observed. "Purpose?" "Keeps me awake, helps me think." Marvin took a sip and grimaced. "Though this synthetic stuff barely qualifies as coffee. Your species requires chemical stimulants for optimal cognition." Marvin chuckled. "Not requires exactly, more like appreciates. It's a comfort thing as much as a functional one." "Comfort," Fixer repeated, as if testing the concept. "My species seeks efficiency, not comfort." "And how's that working out for you?" Marvin gestured around at the stalled metamorphosis. If a gelatinous alien could look chagrined, Fixer managed it. Point acknowledged. They settled into a companionable silence as Marvin spread out his books and notes on the floor. After a while, he asked, "So, what brings whatever you are, to Mars anyway? We're not exactly on the main trade routes." "Research mission," Fixer replied. "Studying atmospheric transformation techniques. Mars partial success case." "You're terraformers?" Marvin looked up with renewed interest. "Among other functions, my species transforms worlds for habitation, creates balance." "Explains the ship," Marvin mused. "If you're in the business of planetary transformation, a living vessel that adapts to different environments would be useful." "Ship entity adapts to all environments except void between stars. Requires wings for void jumping." "Like a butterfly," Marvin murmured, "except instead of flying between flowers, it flies between stars." Fixer's form pulsed with what might have been approval. "Accurate analogy. Hobbes human understands well." "Call me Marvin," he said, smiling slightly. "If we're going to save your ship and my colony, we might as well be on a first-name basis." "Marvin," Fixer repeated, the translation giving the name an odd, melodic quality. "What designation follows?" Hobbes human suggested dual naming convention. "Just Marvin is fine. Hobbes is my family name. Humans usually have at least 2 names." "Interesting inefficiency," Fixer commented. "My species designates by function. I fix things, therefore Fixer." "Direct," Marvin acknowledged. "So, what happens if your function changes?" "Designation changes. Have been explorer, have been communicator, once, briefly, was warrior." "You've been a warrior?" Marvin couldn't help but glance skeptically at Fixer's seemingly fragile form. Fixer's substance darkened momentarily, swirling with red and black patterns. "Form adapts to function. Current form optimized for technical manipulation, environmental analysis." Marvin raised his hands in surrender. "No offense intended. I'm just trying to understand your species better." "No offense registered." Fixer's colors returned to their previous golden green. "Curiosity appreciated. Few humans ask about my species. Most assume based on appearance." "Well, in fairness, you look like something I might find in a petri dish," Marvin teased gently. Fixer's form vibrated in what Marvin was now certain was laughter. Humans looked like structural support systems with too many rigid components and insufficient adaptive capacity. Marvin found himself laughing along. Touché. The hours passed as they worked through Marvin's technical manuals, looking for principles that might help complete the ship's wing pattern. Marvin explained Earth engineering concepts while Fixer translated them into terms that might be compatible with the ship's biological systems. As the Martian night fell, the ship's interior lighting dimmed to a soft blue glow that reminded Marvin of twilight on Earth. He leaned back against a warm wall, fatigue finally catching up to him. Beside him, Fixer's form had settled into a more stable shape, pulsing gently with inner light. "Your colony," Fixer said after a comfortable silence. "Why establish here? Harsh conditions, isolation." Marvin considered the question. Humans have a thing for frontiers, new places to explore, new challenges to overcome. He shrugged, and for some of us, a chance to start over. "You came to start over?" Fixer's tone was curious without being intrusive. "Something like that." Marvin stared into the distance. "I had a reputation on Earth, talented but unreliable. Took on a high-profile government contract, promised I could fix an atmospheric processor that no one else could repair. And failed," Fixer guessed. "Catastrophically," Marvin confirmed with a grim smile. "The processor overloaded during my experimental repair, took out half the facility. No casualties, thankfully, but my career was over. Mars was far enough away to escape the reputation. Yet now attempt similar challenge with ship entity." Marvin hadn't thought of it that way. "I guess I am. Old habits die hard." Perhaps not habit, perhaps true nature. Attempt impossible things because must be attempted. That's a charitable way of looking at my bullheadedness. Marvin chuckled. Fixer's form moved closer, almost touching Marvin's arm. Observe. Marvin human came to ship entity when others fled, listened when others probed, patient when time short. These not failures, these strengths. The simple validation caught Marvin off guard, a warm feeling spreading in his chest. When was the last time someone had seen his approach as a strength rather than a liability? "Thanks," he said quietly. "I appreciate that." Fixer's form vibrated at a frequency that Marvin felt rather than heard, a gentle, almost comforting hum. Without thinking, he reached out his hand. Fixer extended a tendril that brushed against his fingers, cool at first touch, then warming to match his body temperature. "Your species values physical contact?" Fixer asked. "Many of us do," Marvin replied. "It's reassuring. Connects us." "Interesting. My species connects through frequency resonance. Similar purpose, different method." The vibration from Fixer's form intensified slightly, and Marvin felt an odd tingling sensation that spread up his arm. It wasn't unpleasant, rather like the feeling of a limb waking up, but without the discomfort. "Is that how you're connecting now?" "Attempting primitive approximation," Fixer admitted. "Difficult across species barriers." Something about the aliens' earnest effort to bridge their differences touched Marvin deeply. How long had it been since he'd connected with anyone, human or otherwise? His life on Mars had been solitary by design, focused on his work to the exclusion of meaningful relationships. "It's nice," he said simply. They remained like that for a while, human and alien, connected by touch and vibration in the gentle blue light of a living ship. For the first time since arriving on Mars, Marvin didn't feel quite so alone. Morning arrived with a harsh buzz from Marvin's communicator. He jerked awake, momentarily disoriented by the pulsing walls and crystalline formations surrounding him. He'd fallen asleep in the ship's central chamber, a makeshift pillow of folded clothing under his head. Fixer hovered nearby, apparently engaged in some kind of communication with the ship. tendrils of its form connected to multiple crystals. Marvin checked his communicator, a message from Commander Powell. 18 hours remaining. Containment team prepping for arrival. Any progress? He asked Fixer, stretching to work out the kinks in his back from sleeping on the floor. The alien disconnected from the crystals, its form contracting slightly. Partial. Ship entity processing pattern information from your manuals. Attempting to adapt, but missing crucial transition sequences. Marvin rubbed his face, trying to clear the fog of sleep. We need to find a way to bridge the gap between human engineering principles and your ship's biological processes. He began pacing, an activity that helped him think. The problem is translation. We're providing information, but it's like trying to explain color to someone who can only see in black and white. We need an interface, something that can translate our patterns into forms the ship can integrate. Fixer pulsed thoughtfully. Perhaps direct connection possible. What do you mean? Ship entity processes information through crystal resonance. Human technology uses electrical signals. Perhaps device to convert between? Marvin stopped pacing. An interface device that might actually work. His mind was already racing through the components he would need. I'll need to go back to my workshop. Outside, the two enforcement officers straightened as Marvin emerged from the ship. He nodded to them casually. Just heading to my shop for supplies. I'll be back soon. They watched him suspiciously but made no move to stop him. Powell had given him 24 hours, after all. In his workshop, Marvin gathered components with feverish intensity. Circuit boards, crystal oscillators, frequency modulators, and more esoteric pieces he'd collected from various alien technologies he'd repaired over the years. He worked rapidly, soldering connections, programming control chips, and assembling the device that was taking shape in his mind. The interface would need to convert electrical signals into the specific vibrational frequencies that Fixer's ship used for information processing. It was experimental, borderline theoretical, and exactly the kind of challenge Marvin lived for. Hours later, he returned to the ship with his creation, a cobbled-together apparatus that looked like a cross between a satellite dish, a music synthesizer, and a medical scanner. The enforcement officers had been joined by 4 more, all watching the ship with increased vigilance. Making progress, one of them called as Marvin passed. Getting there, he replied non-committally. Inside, he found Fixer in an agitated state, its form cycling rapidly through colors and shapes. What's wrong? Colonial enforcers increasing. Fixer's translation came through with static interference. Ship entity sensing aggressive intent. Defensive systems activating. That would be a very bad idea, Marvin said firmly. Powell is just being cautious. Attack her people, and she'll have justification to bring in heavy weaponry. Fixer's form stabilized somewhat. Understood, but time diminishing. I know. That's why I brought this. Marvin held up his makeshift device. An interface that might help your ship process our engineering patterns. It's experimental, but must be attempted, Fixer finished for him, its tone carrying what might have been approval. In the crystal chamber, Marvin set up the interface device, connecting it to several of his technical manuals that he'd converted to digital format. The idea was to scan the engineering diagrams and convert them into vibrational patterns that the ship's crystals could interpret as growth templates. This might feel strange, he warned as he activated the device. If anything hurts or feels wrong, tell me immediately. The interface hummed to life, lights blinking across its control panel as it began processing the first set of diagrams, structural support frameworks that Marvin hoped might translate to wing skeleton patterns. The nearest crystal began to pulse in rhythm with the interface, emitting a high-pitched tone that made Marvin's teeth ache. Ship entity receiving, Fixer confirmed. Pattern recognition at 17% compatibility. Continuing. Marvin adjusted settings, fine-tuning frequencies and amplitude as Fixer provided feedback. The compatibility slowly increased, 23%, 31%, 42%, but then plateaued. Not sufficient. Fixer's form dimmed. Requires minimum 75% pattern compatibility for metamorphosis continuation. Marvin rubbed his chin thoughtfully. We need something more directly analogous to wing structures. He scrolled through his digital library, stopping at a detailed text on aerodynamics. Let's try this. As the interface processed the new information, the crystals began to glow brighter, their humming taking on a harmonic quality that felt almost musical. The compatibility rose to 53%, then 61%. Better, Fixer acknowledged, but still insufficient. Marvin's communicator buzzed again, a message from Powell. 12 hours remaining, final warning. The pressure was mounting. Marvin wiped sweat from his forehead, his mind racing for solutions. What was he missing? The problem, he thought aloud, is that we're still approaching this too mechanically. Your ship isn't just a machine following blueprints. It's a living entity following biological imperatives. He looked at his remaining reference materials, and his eyes fell on a book he'd almost forgotten he had, an illustrated guide to Earth's fauna, including detailed anatomical studies of birds, bats, and insects. He'd bought it years ago out of nostalgia for Earth's wildlife. Let's try something completely different, he said, connecting the book to his scanner. Let's give your ship some real wings to model after. The interface began processing the biological wing structures, the hollow bones of birds, the membranous wings of bats, the intricate structures of dragonfly wings. The crystals responded immediately, pulsing with renewed energy, their humming deepening to a resonance that Marvin could feel in his chest. Compatibility rising, Fixer reported excitedly. 68%, 72%, 79%. The entire ship shuddered, and a low groaning sound emanated from the walls. The folded wing structures visible from the outside began to twitch and flex. It's working, Marvin exclaimed. Then everything went wrong. The interface sparked violently, components smoking as power surged through it. The crystals flashed with blinding intensity, and the ship's internal lights shifted to an angry red. Marvin was thrown backward by an invisible force, landing hard against the far wall. What happened? He gasped, struggling to his feet. Fixer's form had contracted to a tight ball, pulsing with distress. Pattern integration too rapid, ship entity rejecting, defense systems activating. Outside, alarms began to wail, the enforcement officers reacting to whatever readings they were getting from the ship. Through the ship's external monitors, Marvin could see them retreating to their vehicles, weapons drawn. We need to stabilize it, Marvin said, approaching the damaged interface. The integration needs to be slower, more gradual. No time, Fixer's translation was breaking up. Colonial forces preparing attack. Ship entity will defend. That'll just make things worse. Marvin tried to repair the smoking interface, but several key components were beyond salvaging. I need more parts. Different approach. A new alert sounded from his communicator. Powell was calling directly this time, her face appearing on the small screen, tight with anger. Hobbs, our sensors are detecting weapons-grade energy buildup in that vessel. You have 5 minutes to power it down, or we take action. It's not weapons, Marvin tried to explain. It's a biological response to stress. We're trying to... 5 minutes. Powell cut him off. Then we neutralize the threat. The screen went dark. Marvin turned to Fixer, desperation setting in. I need to get back to my workshop. I can build a more stable interface, but I need components. No time, Fixer repeated. Colonial vehicles charging weapons. Marvin's mind raced. There had to be a solution, a way to buy time. The ionizer flare, he said suddenly, in my emergency kit. He dug through the kit he'd brought and pulled out a small cylindrical device, an illegal piece of equipment he kept for emergencies. Ionizer flares could temporarily disable electrical systems within a limited radius, giving stranded mechanics time to fix critical failures before life support gave out. They were strictly controlled because they could also be used to disable security systems. "This will knock out their vehicles for about 30 minutes, he explained to Fixer, "but it'll also fry my backup generator that's powering the remaining systems in the interface." "Without interface, pattern integration stops," Fixer warned. "We'll have to rely on what the ship has already absorbed," Marvin said grimly. "It's our only chance to avoid a confrontation that could trigger the catastrophic energy release." He hurried to the ship's entrance, ionizer flare in hand. Outside, he could see the enforcement vehicles powering up their neutralizer cannons, non-lethal but devastating to electronic and organic systems alike. Marvin activated the flare and threw it as far as he could toward the vehicles. It detonated in a brilliant flash of blue-white light, followed by the distinctive whine of electrical systems failing. The vehicles went dark, their weapons powering down. He ducked back inside the ship as angry shouts erupted from the enforcement officers. His communicator died in his pocket, another casualty of the ionizer pulse. "That won't make me any friends," he muttered. Returning to the crystal chamber, as predicted, his backup generator had failed, the interface now completely dead. "Did the ship get enough information?" he asked Fixer. "Unknown." The alien's form was pulsing erratically. "Integration process interrupted at critical phase. Ship entity. Struggling." The walls around them shuddered, the pulsing lights flickering between red and purple. The crystals emitted discordant tones that set Marvin's teeth on edge. "What can I do?" he asked, feeling helpless for the first time since taking on this challenge. Fixer extended tendrils to several crystals simultaneously, attempting to stabilize pattern integration manually. "Difficult. Requires concentration." Marvin stood back, watching as Fixer's form began to glow with increasing intensity, the alien clearly exerting itself in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. The minutes ticked by in tense silence, broken only by the ship's groaning and the discordant crystal tones. Gradually, the harsh red lighting softened to purple, then blue. The dissonant crystal tones resolved into a more harmonious humming. The shuddering of the walls calmed to a gentle pulsation. "Is it working?" Marvin asked softly. "Pattern stabilizing." Fixer's voice came through weakly. "Ship entity accepting integration, metamorphosis, resuming." A deep, rumbling vibration ran through the entire ship, different from the earlier distress. This felt purposeful, directed. Through the external monitors, Marvin could see the massive wing structures beginning to unfold, stretching outward like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. "It's beautiful," he breathed. The wing membranes caught the light of the rising Martian sun, iridescent patterns rippling across surfaces that seemed impossibly delicate yet radiated power. They extended fully, spanning at least 30 meters on each side, their structures echoing both the mechanical frameworks and biological forms that Marvin had provided. A movement on the monitors caught his attention. Commander Powell was approaching on foot, her environmental suit marking her as a bright spot against the red landscape. She'd removed her helmet, her expression visible even at a distance, determined, wary, but not hostile. "Company's coming," Marvin told Fixer. "How's the ship doing?" "Metamorphosis 67% complete." Fixer's form was gradually regaining its normal coloration. "Will achieve completion within 3 rotations, no longer risk of catastrophic release." "Good. That's good." Marvin felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over him. He'd been running on adrenaline and synthetic coffee for over 24 hours. "Marvin human should rest," Fixer observed. Biological processes require recovery period. Soon, Marvin promised. First, I need to make sure Powell doesn't try anything rash. He made his way to the ship's entrance, stepping outside to meet the approaching commander. The morning air was crisp and clear, the dust storm having finally dissipated entirely. Powell stopped at a cautious distance, her hand resting near her sidearm. "Quite a light show, Hobbs," she said dryly. "Care to explain why my vehicles are disabled and why that ship now has wings?" "The wings are supposed to be there," Marvin explained, keeping his tone reasonable. "The ship was stuck in mid-metamorphosis. We managed to provide the information it needed to complete the process." "We?" "Myself and the ship's pilot, Fixer." Marvin gestured vaguely behind him. "The ship is no longer in danger of an energy overload. It just needs a few more days to complete its transformation, and then it'll leave peacefully." Powell's eyes narrowed. "And the ionizer flare? Those are restricted for a reason. Hobbs, it was that or watch your people fire on a frightened, living ship that would have defended itself." Marvin countered, "I made a judgment call. A judgment call that violated at least 7 colonial regulations." "Probably more like 12, Marvin admitted with a tired smile. "But the colony's still standing, so I'd call it a net positive." Powell studied him for a long moment, then looked past him to the magnificent winged ship. Something in her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I should arrest you," she said finally. "Impound that ship. Bring in its occupant for questioning." "You could try," Marvin acknowledged, "but I don't think it would end well for anyone." As if in response to his words, the ship's wings flexed slightly, sending iridescent patterns cascading across their surfaces. Even Powell, with her rigid adherence to regulations, couldn't quite hide her awe at the sight. She sighed. "The containment team from Central will be here in 3 days. I suggest your friend completes its metamorphosis and departs before then." "That's the plan," Marvin assured her. Powell turned to go, then paused. "You know, Hobbs, the Colonial Science Division has been looking for a consultant on unusual alien technologies. Someone with unconventional approaches." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I could put your name forward, conditional on you paying the fines for today's violations." "Of course." Marvin blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a job?" "A consulting contract," she corrected, "on an as-needed basis. Your methods may be unorthodox, but they get results." She glanced meaningfully at the winged ship. "Sometimes that's what we need." Before Marvin could respond, she was walking away, speaking into her restored communicator about recovery vehicles for her disabled squadron. Inside the ship, Fixer was waiting. "Colonial Authority human departed without conflict?" "More than that," Marvin said, still processing what had happened. "She offered me a consulting job, official recognition for my unconventional approaches, as she put it." "Appropriate recognition." Fixer's form pulsed with what seemed like approval. "Marvin human sees beyond surface, understands deeper patterns." "I just listen." Marvin shrugged. "Pay attention to what systems are telling me instead of imposing my expectations on them." "Rare quality," Fixer observed, "in humans and my species alike." The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity as the ship completed its metamorphosis. The wings continued to develop, gaining strength and definition. The hull's color deepened to a rich indigo shot through with gold patterns that reminded Marvin of neural networks. The crystals in the central chamber grew and divided, their tones becoming increasingly complex and harmonious. Marvin divided his time between monitoring the transformation, making minor adjustments to help the process along, and simply talking with Fixer. Their conversations ranged from technical discussions about their respective technologies to philosophical debates about the nature of life and consciousness, to personal stories that revealed more about each other than either had perhaps intended. On the morning of the third day, Marvin awoke to find the ship humming with a new energy. The walls pulsed with vivid blue light, and the wing structures outside were fully extended, their surfaces rippling with power. Fixer's form was more vibrant than Marvin had yet seen it, threads of gold and green swirling rapidly within its gelatinous mass. "Ship entity metamorphosis complete," the alien announced with unmistakable joy. "Void jump capability restored." "That's great news," Marvin said, ignoring the pang of something like disappointment that shot through him. Of course Fixer would be leaving. That had been the goal all along. "Must depart before containment team arrives," Fixer continued. "Ship entity eager to test new wings." "Of course," Marvin nodded, gathering his remaining tools and books. "I should get my things together." As he packed, he felt a strange heaviness in his chest. In just a few days, he'd grown more attached to the alien and its living ship than he had to anyone or anything in his 15 years on Mars. The prospect of returning to his solitary existence in the workshop felt unexpectedly bleak. "Marvin Human seems diminished," Fixer observed, hovering close. "Just tired," Marvin tried to smile. "It's been an intense few days." Untrue statement. Fixer's translation came through with surprising gentleness. Detecting physiological indicators of emotional distress. Marvin sighed. "I'm going to miss our conversations, that's all. It's not often I meet someone, anyone, who understands my approach to, well, everything." Fixer's form moved closer, almost touching Marvin's chest. "Have proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "Ship entity requires pilot navigator for void jump testing. Current mission data already transmitted to Homeworld. New mission parameters. Flexible." Marvin's heart skipped a beat. "Are you asking me to come with you?" "Temporary expedition," Fixer clarified, "to evaluate wing functionality across various void conditions. Estimated duration, 1 standard orbit. Return to Mars possible if desired." "You want me to spend a year in space with you? Traveling between stars in a living ship with dragon wings?" Marvin couldn't help the grin spreading across his face. That's quite an offer." "Practical arrangement," Fixer insisted, though its form rippled in a way that suggested more than practicality. "Marvin Human understands ship entity. Valuable knowledge." "What about my workshop, my clients?" "Workshop remains, clients find other mechanics temporarily. Consulting contract with Colonial Science Division can specify extended research mission." Marvin laughed. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "Consider options carefully," Fixer advised. "Space travel, different experience, close quarters, isolation." "I've been isolated for 15 years, Marvin said quietly. "The difference is, I wouldn't be alone." Fixer's form pulsed warmly. "Correct assessment." Before Marvin could respond, the ship's external monitors activated, showing the approach of a large transport vessel bearing the insignia of the Colonial Central Authority. The containment team had arrived early. "Time to make a decision," Marvin murmured. He looked around at the living ship that had become more familiar to him in 3 days than his workshop had in 15 years. He thought about Powell's offer, about his clients who barely knew him beyond his reputation for fixing the unfixable, about his solitary evenings with only technical manuals for company. Then he looked at Fixer, whose form now hovered expectantly before him, pulsing with colors that somehow conveyed both hope and patience. "I need to send a message to Commander Powell," he said finally. "Let her know I'm accepting that consulting contract as a field researcher studying interstellar biomechanical propulsion systems." Fixer's form expanded suddenly, engulfing Marvin in a gentle, tingling embrace that lasted only a moment before the alien withdrew, its colors swirling excitedly. Apologies. Fixer's translation came through with a hint of embarrassment. Emotional control momentarily compromised. Don't apologize. Marvin smiled, surprised at how pleasant the brief contact had been. I'm looking forward to learning more about your species' expressions of emotion. Much to teach each other, Fixer agreed, its form stabilizing into a more structured shape that somehow appeared more dignified. Departure in 30 minutes, sufficient time for message transmission. As Marvin quickly composed a message to Powell explaining his research opportunity, he felt lighter than he had in years. The prospect of voyaging among the stars in a living ship with an alien companion who understood him better after 3 days than anyone else had in a lifetime filled him with a sense of purpose he'd almost forgotten. The ship hummed around him, its newly completed wings casting iridescent reflections across the crystal chamber. Outside, the containment team was establishing a perimeter, unaware that their quarry was about to depart. Marvin sent his message, grabbed his toolbox and a small bag of personal items, and joined Fixer in the ship's control nexus, a chamber where the crystalline structures converged in a pattern reminiscent of a neural network. Ready for departure, Fixer announced. Void jump preparations initiating. The ship's humming deepened to a resonance that Marvin felt in his bones. The wings outside began to vibrate at frequencies that made them seem to blur and multiply. Will we be able to see the stars? Marvin asked, suddenly realizing he didn't know what void jumping actually entailed. Better. Fixer's form pulsed with something like excitement. We'll see between stars, space fabric folding visible during transition, spectacular phenomenon. The humming intensified, and the ship began to rise from the Martian surface. Through the monitors, Marvin could see the containment team scrambling back to their vehicles, pointing upward in alarm. They can't stop us, right? He asked, a last-minute twinge of doubt surfacing. Colonial weapons insufficient to penetrate metamorphosed hull, Fixer assured him. Departure unstoppable. As the ship rose higher, accelerating toward the thin Martian atmosphere, Marvin caught a final glimpse of New Olympus sprawled across the edge of Valles Marineris, the colony that had been his home for 15 years, yet never truly felt like one. I almost forgot, Fixer said as the ship broke through the atmosphere into open space. A compartment opened in the wall, revealing Marvin's toolbox, which he'd left behind during the frantic preparations for departure. My tools, Marvin exclaimed. I thought I'd lost them. Ship entity preserved, Fixer explained. Symbol of first contact, first understanding. Marvin ran his hand over the battered toolbox, touched by the gesture. Thank you. The stars stretched around them as the ship's wings began to glow with increasing intensity. The void of space seemed to ripple and fold as the ship prepared for its jump. Void jump commencing, Fixer announced, its form expanding to interface with multiple crystals simultaneously. Recommendation: observe forward visualization. First jump, memorable experience. Marvin turned his attention to the forward monitors, which showed the star-filled space ahead. As the ship's wings reached their maximum vibration frequency, the very fabric of space seemed to part before them, revealing colors and patterns that human eyes were never meant to see, the raw structure of reality itself. It's incredible, he whispered. Beginning of journey, Fixer said, a tendril of its form extending toward Marvin in what he now recognized as a gesture of connection, much to discover together. As Marvin reached out to meet that connection, the ship plunged forward into the folded space between stars, carrying them toward worlds and wonders yet unseen. In his chest, a crystalline gift from Fixer pulsed gently against his skin, a small fragment of the ship's memory crystal, encoding their shared experience and the beginning of something neither human nor alien had anticipated, a bond that transcended species, bridging worlds through understanding, respect, and perhaps something very much like love. The human mechanic and the alien captain disappeared into the void, their dragon-winged ship a brief, brilliant streak against the Martian sky, a legend already forming among the colonists who witnessed its departure, a story about the unfixable ship that flew again, thanks to the man who listened to what it needed rather than imposing what he thought it should be. And somewhere among the stars, that ship sailed on, its wings beating against the currents of space, carrying two beings who had found in each other something neither had realized they were seeking, a companion who truly understood.